In the previous lesson on the CSS box model, we briefly touched on the concept of block and inline boxes. The display property in CSS sets whether an element is treated as a block or inline box and also affects the layout of any child elements. There are quite a few display property values available in CSS, which are all available in the display dropdown in the style panel, but this lesson will focus on inline, block, and flex. Block and inline display properties are specifically designed for laying out text. If a parent element is set to display block or inline, the following layout rules will apply to any child elements that are set to display block or inline. This set of layout rules is also known as flow layout. Inline elements are stacked horizontally and are displayed in the inline direction according to the writing mode of the document. For example, in English, that direction is left to right. Block elements are stacked vertically, one on top of the other. Here we have two paragraph elements of text that are set to display block. They are stacked vertically on top of each other. This highlighted section is created by adding a span element inside the paragraph that is set to display in line, so it stacks horizontally with the content either side. If we change the display property of the span element to block, you'll see it stack vertically in the same way as the paragraphs. For building layouts on your websites, you'll want to reach for a display property where you also have control over the layout of child elements. And a good way to demonstrate this is to take a look at CSS Flexbox, which creates a flexible box layout. Here, I have an HTML main element that's set to display flex with 3 child elements. When you set an element to display flex, child elements become flex items, which allow them to be styled with specific CSS properties. In Nordcraft, display flex is the default for most HTML elements. You can define how the flex items are laid out using the flex direction property, which is configured using the down arrow button below the display dropdown. The two most commonly used flex direction properties are column and row. Column stacks the flex items on top of each other, and row lays flex items out horizontally. Now at first glance, flex direction row looks a lot like the flex items are set to display in line. But Flexbox comes with some powerful layout features to automatically distribute available space between flex items and align them in the flex container. Now first, what if you wanted some space between these items? Thinking back to the CSS box model lesson, you might consider adding a margin right to each of the flex items. Instead, we can use the gap property on the flex container to add a gap between each item. Let's find the gap input and let's add 16 pixels. Now, all elements are laid out with that gap between them without needing to add any margins. You can also control the distribution of the elements using the Justify Content property. Click on the Justify Content button to see a list of options. For example, hover over space between, space around, or space evenly to see the difference in the layouts. And because space is automatically distributed, you'll see the space between the flex items expand and contract as you resize the canvas. Additionally, because we also set a gap, the space between the flex items will go no lower than that value. Justify Content aligns items along the main axis, and Align Items positions items along the cross axis. Setting a combination of Justify Content and Align Items gives you a handy visualization of the layout on this grid in the Style panel. You can also click on the grid buttons to set a combination of those two properties in one go. Now, these boxes are not a good representation of real-world content, so let's take a look at a better example. Here, I have 3 elements with some more realistic text inside of them. The container is display flex with a gap of 16 pixels, Justify Content is set to space between, and Align Items is set to center. But I can't see all of my content. What's happening? When you use Flexbox, items can either grow to fill extra space or shrink to avoid overflowing. This is controlled using the Flex Grow and Flex Shrink properties and is configured on the Flex items, not the Flex container. These properties can be grouped together in CSS text under the single shorthand property Flex. To configure this, expand the Size section on the Style panel and find Flex. Flex uses a ratio-based system to define how to distribute space between the flex items. If I select the first element and choose flex 1, you'll see it shrink. If we do the same for each element, they'll all shrink or grow evenly. Using the 3 dots to expand the flex section, you'll see that flex grow and flex shrink are both set to 1, which can then be configured separately if needed. Now, given that this is a ratio-based property, you can use this to assign single items to take up more or less space than others. For example, by selecting the middle item and choosing flex 2, this means it will take up twice as much space as the other elements, which are set to flex 1. What's great about Flexbox is that we've achieved this 3-column layout that fills all available space and responds to the viewport size without using any hard-coded values for widths or heights, and we didn't need to add any margins to space out the columns. And this sets us up really nicely for the next lesson, where we'll dive deeper into responsive design and fluid layouts.